This happened to me a few years ago. I need to give a few background details before I begin. I am female, and my mother is from Ethiopia, and my father is a Mississippi native. I'm a few shades darker than most Caucasians, but sometimes people mistake me for white. At the time, I was living in the southernmost part of the reddest state in the US, and got a job as a toddler teacher at a daycare by my house. I loved my job. The children were so well behaved and had the cutest little faces you could imagine. I have always been a sucker for the terrible ones that no teacher likes to deal with. Those are the ones with the most interesting personalities. I worked in the 1s and 2s room. I also taught after school, so I had my own separate classroom for the afternoons. There was this one little boy in particular, named Daniel, who was always making trouble. He would fight the other babies unprovoked. He would pee on purpose while you were changing him, and could start stripping at any random moment. Needless to say, Daniel was a handful. As I said before, I have a way with children that act out like this, and before long Daniel was my little buddy. When a teacher couldn't handle him, he was sent to me, where he would do just fine. One day when his father came to pick him up, he was with me in my class. I had seen his father pick him up plenty of times, so I knew it was him, though we had never spoken before. He was hot. He reminded me of Wentworth Miller a little. I was actually kind of attracted to him, so it caught me off guard when he said something along the lines of, "Danny, what the hell are you doing in this blankety blank class?" Insert the blanks with racist terms. This caught me completely off guard, because although I'm from the deep south where racism is everywhere, I had never experienced it at my job. All of the parents were glad to see me, and I had a good rapport with all of them. I didn't respond to his rude comment, however. I just got Daniel ready, and I was hoping he didn't do our secret handshake, which involved a series of hand claps and ends in us pressing our foreheads together and chanting, "I'm the best." Unfortunately, Daniel wouldn't leave until we did the entire handshake. I looked up expecting his father to be highly upset, but he was just standing there staring at me with the weirdest wide-eyed toothiest grin that sent chills down my spine. Even Daniel looked up like, "Whoa," and looked back at me. I stood up to say bye and hopefully get him out of my class faster, but he stepped closer to me and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I like the way you handle my son." The way he said the word handle made the whole statement sound very perverted. I remained professional and said, "Thank you, sir. He is a joy to have around." The very next day, Daniel didn't come to school. This wasn't out of the ordinary either, because sometimes he went to the daycare by his mother's house, which is further away. When I got to my desk, I noticed a red rose that had been spray painted black, and it had a piece of yarn around it like a noose. Another time, I found a small wooden cross on the hood of my car with a lighter next to it. Things like this happened for weeks. One day as the day was coming to a close, all of the other employees had left for the day, and I had to close. We had a huge ball pit in the back of the center that covered 50% of the entire classroom. I was wiping down blocks when I heard the very familiar sound of someone jumping in the ball pit. I got up to investigate, thinking that it was DJ McSqueak, our pet guinea pig who was notorious for escaping and jumping into the ball pit. I looked in the cage, and sure enough, DJ was not in his cage. I climbed in the pit and tried looking for him, when I noticed a pair of legs in the ball pit. I noped the hell out of the room, screaming as I heard a roar of plastic balls behind me, indicating that whoever was in there was now chasing me. I ran into the next classroom and locked the door. I could see the man's face pressed up against the window, and I recognized Daniel's dad. He was screaming at me to open the door. I started frantically looking for a phone, but I couldn't find one. The main phone was in the office, and the handset that belonged in this classroom was missing. I ended up finding the missing handset, but it was dead. I figured that this guy didn't know that it was dead, and I pretended to call the police. It worked. He had the angriest look on his face and stormed out of the center. And after I heard the door click, I sprinted to my classroom, locking the door and calling the police for real. They showed up 10 minutes later, and I told them what happened. He was later arrested and charged, but he was out of jail after a month. Daniel, I think you are the sweetest little boy I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I hope one day you find this story and recognize I'm talking about you and remember the bond we shared. As for your father, I would prefer not to meet him again. In December of 2014, my parents decided to send me to Mexico for 2 weeks to visit family that I hadn't seen in quite a while. The only reason I really wanted to go to Mexico was to see my favorite uncle, Juan. He lived with my parents and I for 8 years in the United States. He came here to make a better life for himself, like most immigrants, but a couple of years later, he got into some money issues and started selling drugs. A couple months later, he got arrested for drug possession and was deported back to Mexico. When he got back, my grandma called my mom saying that he was still selling drugs. I got on the plane to Mexico and greeted my family upon arrival. Later that day, my family was getting ready for a party. When we got there, I saw my uncle Juan, ran up to him, and gave him the biggest hug I'd ever given. Later into the evening, my uncle had a little bit too much to drink, and I know how he is when he gets drunk. He was talking to some guy I had never seen, and I asked my cousin if he knew who that guy was. My cousin said he is one of the leaders of a Mexican drug cartel. I went up to Juan and stood by him while he was still talking to the guy. When I turned my head to see what my cousin was doing, I started to hear screaming and a beer bottle breaking, and see my uncle pushing the guy. I run up to Juan's aid. I'm 5'11" and 260 pounds, and I took wrestling in high school, so I know how to break up a fight. Not to mention I was bigger than most of the people there. After the party, Juan and I walked home, and when we got there, we went right to sleep. The next morning, Juan and I went to get something to eat, and as we were walking, I noticed a black Honda Civic following us. When we got to the restaurant, I saw the guy from the party get out of the car and start approaching the restaurant. Juan and I decided to go somewhere else to kill some time before going to my uncle's bar. While we were walking, I saw the same black Honda Civic follow us again, and I told my uncle. He had noticed it too, so we took a couple of turns to see if he was following us. When I looked back to see if he was, I saw in the car that he had another person with him. My uncle told me not to make a scene over it. When we got to my uncle's bar, he told me to help him unload some beer from the back room. I went into the back room, and a couple of minutes later I hear my uncle say, "What the fuck are you guys doing here?" Followed by 3 gunshots. I ran out as fast as I could, but when I got there I was in shock. My uncle was lying on the ground in a pool of blood. I called the police and ambulance immediately. I then called my grandma and told her what happened. She began to cry, and hearing an old woman cry is one of the saddest things you'll ever hear. Hearing her cry like that made me bawl my eyes out. My family came rushing to the hospital, and about 3 or 4 hours later the doctors told us that my uncle didn't make it, but they tried to save his life. A couple of weeks after the incident, I was back in the United States, and my mom got a call from my cousin who asked to speak with me. He told me that the guy my uncle was pushing at the party, and his friend, had killed my uncle, and they are now serving life sentences. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. I appreciate everyone watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. True.